So your initial starter, if you wrote all the numbers from 300 to 400 on a piece of paper, how many times would you have written the number 3? And the answer to that one is 120 times, with the remaining part of the lesson. Watch the following clip and think about what is happening around the world, where did it all begin, and can you think about which event started off this shift? Now, the film that you're going to see is from 2006 and it's called Shift Happens. It's one of the first films to go viral on YouTube. As students watch this, have them thinking about what it is that they're looking at, how accurately the predictions made are, how inaccurate the predictions are. So, for example, they will talk about the growth of MySpace and how big a population MySpace would have if it was the size of a country. It would be the 8th largest in the world. Facebook supplanted MySpace. Twitter and other forms of social media are supplanting that. So obviously it's all about this process of change and this idea of the use of the word exponential. How incredibly quickly the world is changing. Where did it all begin? Well, this is the Industrial Revolution, an event that happened in this country starting around 1750, based upon the lucky circumstances that Britain found itself in, that as a nation we had resolved our issues over religion. Catholics and Protestants had found a compromise, the Church of England, and religion was no longer a major issue in Britain. Power. Once religion had been dealt with, who should rule the country? Should it be the king, the monarch, because dad or mum had ruled before them? Or should it be the Parliament ruling as representing the will of the people? That was resolved through the Civil War. And although we maintained the monarchy, the power of the monarch was very, very clearly defined, and Parliament would be the principal source of power in this country. Now we had resolved the issues of religion and power, Britain could focus upon progress, innovation, business, and we did that way before anyone else, and marry that to the fact that we had loads and loads of resources like coal. Coal can heat water, water generates steam. Put steam under pressure, it can move pistons. If you can move a piston, you can create energy, and you can focus that energy through machines. And that was done in Britain first, and in Britain first we became the world's first industrial society, and we started the process of creating the modern world. With the power and the wealth that we generated through the Industrial Revolution, we conquered 1/5 of the world, we ruled the oceans, and although many parts and aspects of the modern world may be unfamiliar to us, an awful lot is familiar because the world has followed what Britain did in the Industrial Revolution. So then we introduce a brief summary, having watched the film. Changes happening all around the world every day. The changes that brought about the modern world which we live in today began back in 1750 here in Britain. The event which began the process of the change was called the Industrial Revolution. So we then introduce the objectives and the outcomes for this particular lesson. Now, an additional task here, you can discuss this, you can have students talk about this, or you can move through it quite quickly depending upon the group that you have. Try and match up the letters on the left with the numbers on the right. Okay, so we have a phone, we have the first computer, we have an Atari computer down here, we have the first plane, then we have a home computer, a game station, a mobile phone, and Apollo 11. So literally in 100 years we move from Alexander Graham Bell and Thomas Edison's first phones to the mobile phone. How even within the life of the teacher in the classroom, these have completely changed. No one had a phone when it was first invented. Then people had phones, public phones. Then people have phones in the streets. And that for many teachers teaching today, the idea of mobile phones was the stuff of science fiction when they were at school. It's now a ubiquitous item. In fact, it's an effort to separate children from their phones. And then, of course, those phones became smartphones. And smartphones can interact with the World Wide Web, and people can talk to their phones. And as a teacher, the idea of having a conversation with a computer on your phone sounds ridiculous, yet it is a part and feature of everyday life, all within 100 years. B is matched up with number 1. B over here, this is the world's first computer. This is Colossus. This was the computer designed by Alan Turing when he was asked to crack German codes during World War II. He said it was impossible. No human could crack the German codes. They were that sophisticated. So he simply proposed that if a human can't do it, he would build a machine that could do it. And this is the machine he built, which was at Bletchley Park during World War II. Something like 10,000 calculations a second. This is a £1,000 personal computer, a home computer today, that can calculate billions of calculations per second. All within 70 years. A 1980s game console, an Atari game console, that you could play games like Pong, knocking a cursor around a screen with two tennis bats. A PlayStation 2 from somewhere around 1998. And when this one was launched in 1998, Sony had said that if it had been released a year sooner, it would have been the world's most powerful computer. And yet within a year, the world's most powerful computer was only good enough to be a games console. And of course, this is massively out of date compared to the machines that the students will be familiar with using now. And finally, transport. 1903, the Wright brothers flew their plane in North Carolina on the beach at Kitty Hawk. The plane flew for about 20 meters and nosedive into the sea and threw the pilot another 20 meters out into the ocean. In 1969, so 66 years later, Neil Armstrong and the crew of Apollo 11 flew to the moon, landed, and safely returned. 250,000 miles there and 250,000 miles back. And they are separated simply by 66 years. All examples. So then, the main task of the lesson, and if needs be, if it overruns into a homework, what students now have to do is do some analysis and some initial comprehension. So what you're going to do is you're going to show 2 pictures. One of Britain in 17. Each picture studied will allow you to look at the change that has taken place in those 140 years between the 2 scenes. And what we want you to do is use the video that's linked to this particular film, which will go through the instructions with the students. And what you're going to do is you're going to color code these 2 pictures for changes in different themes. So, for example, agriculture is the first one. So, give the students the opportunity to put a key at the top of their sheet, give agriculture a colour, obviously green might be the logical one, and colour in everything that's to do with agriculture. Now, that will need defining, but the film does that for you. Industry, so get them colouring factories. Now, plenty of agriculture, hardly anything to do with factories, because this is pre-industrial. Education, well, possibly the church, but nothing more. When they've coloured both pictures, they then have the opportunity to start the analysis of the particular task. To actually look at the pictures, which probably will look very, very surreal, because obviously you've used all these random colours, and then get them to look at the changes that have taken place in one of Britain in 1890, so 140 years apart. Now, when that's done, students can then actually start to analyse what has happened between these 2 periods. So how would have all the change in those 140 years have affected the people? The social impact. How did all of this change affect the role of religion? Now, an obvious extension task to that particular question would be, how has religion survived to the present day? Is it as strong as it was? Is it weaker than it was? What was the economic impact of the Industrial Revolution? Does Britain look like a wealthier place, or a poorer place, or a combination of both? Does it look like everyone has the money? Now, obviously, a written response is required to these, because these basic understandings will be challenged as we explore this topic in more detail. But they could also be the basis of a discussion.